look at how to strive with God. That's basically my title of my message tonight, Striving with God. And we're going to look at the whole chapter as we look at this great passage. I think this passage really is the change and the pivotal chapter in Jacob's life. Starting in verse 1. Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. When Jacob saw them, he said, "This is God's camp." So he called the name of that place Mahanaim. And Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau his brother in the land of Seir, the country of Edom, instructing them, This you shall say to my lord Esau. Thus says your servant Jacob, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed until now. I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, male servants, female servants. I have sent to tell my lord in order that I might find favor in your sight. And the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, We came to your brother Esau, and he is coming to meet you. And there are 400 men with him. When Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, he divided the people who were with him, and the flocks, and the herds, and the camels into two camps, thinking, If Esau comes to the camp, one camp, and attacks it, then the camp that is left will escape. And Jacob said, O God, my father Abraham, and God, my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, Return to your country and to your kindred, that I might do good to you. I am not worthy of the least of all the deeds of steadfast love and all the faithfulness that you have shown to your servant. For with only my staff I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become two camps. Please deliver me from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, that he may come and attack me, the mothers with the children. But you said, I will surely do good to you and make your offspring as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for a multitude. So he stayed there that night, and from what he had with him, he took a present for his brother Esau. 200 female goats, 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milking camels and their calves, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys and 10 male donkeys. These he handed over to his servants, every drove by itself, and he said to his servants, Pass on ahead of me, and put a space between the drove and a drove. He instructed the first, When Esau my brother meets you and asks you, To whom do you belong? Where are you going? And whose are these ahead of you? Then you shall say, They belong to your servant Jacob. They are a present sent to my lord Esau, and moreover he is behind us. He likewise instructed the second and the third and all who followed the droves. You shall say the same thing to Esau when you find him. And you shall say, Moreover, your servant Jacob is behind us. For he thought, I may appease him with the present that goes ahead of me. And afterwards I shall see his face, and perhaps he will accept me. So the present passed on ahead of him, and he himself stayed that night in the camp. The same night he arose and took his 2 wives and 2 female servants and his 11 children and crossed the ford of Jabbok. And he took them and sent them across the stream and everything else that he had. And he was left alone. And a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, Let me go, for the day is broken. But Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. And he said to him, What is your name? And he said, Jacob. Then he said, Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men, and it prevailed. Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the place, the name of the place, Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered. The sun rose upon him, and he passed Peniel limping because of his hip. Therefore to this day the people of Israel do not eat the sinew of the thigh that is on the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip on the sinew of the thigh. Would you pray with me? Father, I pray that as we look at this great story, it would be a story that encourages us and exhorts us to have a vital faith in your promises, in your protection. And Father, I pray that as we look towards you, that we know that you are the one that blesses your children. All blessings and all good things come from you. And may we seek and strive after that. In Jesus' name, amen. This chapter is a pivotal chapter in the life of Jacob. As I read over it today and was studying it this evening, I found that people disagree about when Jacob actually exhibited what we would call saving faith. If you remember 20 years earlier at Bethel, he exhibited a time of worship where he created a monument to God as a remembrance of what God had done and what God had promised to bring him back to the land of Canaan. But Jacob had to go through what we would call some perspective training. His world and life view needed to be changed. And so for that 20 years he had been deceiving and scheming and almost ignoring God to some degree. There's a popular story that I know pastors love to tell about a doctor who needed to work with a man who thought he was dead. This man who thought he was dead was actually very, very much alive and was carrying on conversations with people. But anytime you asked him if he was alive or dead, he said, "Well, I'm dead." And so the doctor thought for a moment how he was going to analytically and without a doubt prove that this man was alive. And so he asked the man who thought he was dead, "Do dead men bleed?" And of course the man thought about it for a minute and says, "No, dead men don't bleed." So the doctor took his hand or his finger, pricked his finger, and out came blood. And this other man who thought he was dead looked at the blood, looked at the doctor, looked at the blood again, and looked up to the doctor and said, "My, dead men do bleed." Sometimes it's hard for us to change how we see the world, how we see God, how we see our relationship with God. And I think this was very hard for Jacob to do. If you remember, where had Jacob come from? He's come from a life of scheming. If you remember back when you read the story of Jacob, you read of him and his mother scheming for the birthright and scheming for the blessing. And because of that, you have a brother who is very angry with Jacob at this point in time. And so his mom says, "Well, go away for a few days," thinking it would only be a few days that Jacob would be gone to her, maybe to her brother Laban. And so he goes to his uncle, and he's not there just for a few days. He's there for 20 years. And for the first 7 years, he works for his uncle for the hand of Rebekah. But what does Laban do? Laban pulls a fast one on him, and during his supposedly betrothal night, he sleeps with Leah, the older sister of Rebekah, and so all of a sudden now you have him having to work another 7 years. Did I get it wrong? I get that wrong. It's Rachel, not Rebecca. Isaac is Rebecca. I'm thinking, sitting here going, that doesn't sound right to me. But what you have now is that he's worked 14 years so that he could marry 2 wives. And then he agrees with Laban to work more time because he has nothing. Because one of the things that Abraham did, even though he had blessed him, he sent him away with nothing. There was nothing in his pockets. And so Laban makes a deal with Jacob to care for his flocks, and he will give him all the spotted parts of the flocks. And so Jacob devises a scheme where he thinks that he is going to increase his wealth by some sort of magic, so to speak. But we find out it's really God who's in control of the situation, and God is actually blessing Jacob. And we wonder why. Why is God blessing such a rotten scoundrel? Why is God really blessing Jacob? Well, if you really think about it, God blesses scoundrels. You and I are scoundrels. If we thought about it very long, we have this sense of entitlement, or in our own hearts, we have this sense that Jacob really should be disqualified from the blessing of God. But if Jacob is disqualified from the blessing of God, so are you, so am I. Because we've all have in our hearts a bent towards deception and scheming, just like Jacob did. Even his name even betrays that idea. And so Jacob is learning. He decides one day, in the middle of the day when Laban is out, to deceive Laban again, because Laban has changed his wages many times. He goes out and takes his wives, and of course Rachel takes the gods from the house and steals them, and they go off, and Laban comes back and chases down Jacob, and they have a confrontation, and finally there's a covenant made between Laban and Jacob so that Jacob would never come back and have any claim on the property of Laban. The only way that Laban could guarantee that Jacob would do anything is to make a contract with him, because they couldn't trust each other. So you have Jacob now coming back into the promised land. And he's coming back from the north, but at the same time, his older brother is moving up just a little bit up Edom, and they're coming and they're going to meet each other a little bit later on in the book of Genesis. But right now you have this confrontation about to happen. And if you remember back when Jacob was blessed God, there was the prophecy or this vision that he had about a ladder. And as I've studied the passage, one of the most difficult things about this passage, and if you go back to Genesis chapter 28, which talks about the, quote, Jacob's ladder vision, that people disagree about when Jacob actually exhibited saving faith. Some people think he exhibited saving faith before he left the land of Canaan when he made the monument there at Bethel. And some people said he was still not saved until he came back at this point in his life and wrestled with God, or the man that is mentioned in chapter 32, which we'll find out is really the Son of God. And so as I thought about tonight, what does this story teach us about our saving faith? What are the needs that we have when we exhibit saving faith? What does saving faith look like in the lives of Christians? Because how do you know when someone really has saving faith? There are a lot of people in America today that say they have saving faith, don't they? You go on a plane, that people will say, well, yeah, I'm a Christian. I'm a Christian. I remember growing up in the church, and if you asked me when I was 16 or 18 or 20 or 5 or 6, if I was a Christian, I would have probably said yes. But I wasn't. It's always interesting when you go on an airplane. On the airplane, you have a captive audience right next to you, don't you, for about 2-3 hours. Oh, is that mine? No. That reminds me. I'm going to do it to mine too. So as you look at the passage we're looking at here, how does saving faith, how do you know that a man has saving faith?